Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories. Please like and subscribe, and hit that notification icon so you never miss out. Now on with the stories.
I never thought I'd be the one writing a story like this, but here I am feeling frustrated and needing to vent. My situation isn't as bad as some of the horror stories you hear about HOAs, but it still got me pretty angry. Let me start from the beginning. My partner and I had been homeowners for a while, but with the housing market going crazy, we decided to sell our place and rent for a bit. The idea was to wait until things calmed down and became more affordable before jumping back into homeownership. It seemed like a smart move at the time. We ended up finding this townhouse in a community governed by an HOA. I didn't think twice about the HOA thing. In fact, I thought it might be a good thing. When I was a kid, my family had a vacation home in a gated community in Florida, and it was run by an HOA. From what I remember, it was pretty decent. They kept the place looking nice and made sure people weren't doing anything too wild. So when we found this townhouse, I thought, cool, an HOA, that'll probably keep things in order. Unfortunately, I know how wrong I was. After we signed the lease and started getting ready to move in, I made what I now consider my first mistake. I asked the property manager for a copy of the HOA standards. I wanted to make sure we weren't going to accidentally break any rules. But the manager got all shifty. He said, "Oh, we don't provide those. It's hundreds of pages long. You'd have to request a hard copy. Just ask me if you have any questions and I'll get you the answer." Looking back, I should have pushed harder, but I was trusting, maybe a bit naive. I figured, hey, if I have questions, I'll just ask. Big mistake. Now, here's the thing about me. I'm a teacher, and let me tell you, it can be pretty stressful sometimes. To keep my sanity, I really need a space where I can relax, write, and decompress. Outdoor space is huge for me. It helps me avoid burnout and keeps me sane. The townhouse we rented didn't have a covered porch or deck, which was kind of a bummer. But we loved everything else about the place, so we decided we could work around it. We thought, hey, we'll just get a tent or some kind of covering. That way I can be outside even when it's raining or too sunny. Being the responsible tenants we are, we reached out to the property manager about putting up a tent. And you know what? He said it would be fine. He told us to make sure it matched the color of the house and met some vague standards he mentioned. But overall, he gave us the green light. We were stoked. We went out and spent a good chunk of change on this tent. We're talking nearly $300 here. For us, that's not pocket change. But we figured it was worth it for my mental health and overall well-being. We put up the tent last December, and for months everything was great. I had my little outdoor sanctuary where I could write, relax, and just be. I'd sit out there working on my novels, burning some incense or sage, I'm into that spiritual stuff, and occasionally having a cigarette. It was perfect. I was always careful to keep the tent zipped up so the smells wouldn't bother anyone. I even checked with our old neighbors to make sure they couldn't smell anything. They were cool with it, said they couldn't smell a thing. For months nobody said a word about the tent. It was just there doing its job, helping me stay sane. Little did I know, the storm was brewing. About 2 weeks ago, these new people moved in next door. Well, I say people, but it's really just this one kid. He looks like he's college age, but man, he gives off this vibe like he's never had to do anything for himself in his life. You know the type, the kind that will probably have his mom come with him to job interviews when he's 30. Anyway, this kid moves in, and suddenly it's like Grand Central Station next door. His whole family is there, and I mean the whole family. They've got license plates from clear across the country, so they must have made quite the trip to set up their precious boy in his new pad. And let me tell you about this kid's car. It's the kind of ride you don't expect to see a college kid driving unless their parents are loaded or they've got a trust fund. It just screams, my parents bought this for me. Now, I'm not one to judge. Okay, maybe I am a little. But these people, they're something else. They've got this air about them like they're too good to even acknowledge us peasants next door. I'm talking nose in the air, won't even make eye contact kind of attitude. And the noise? That's a whole other story. They're banging around in that house at all hours. I'm talking 2 a.m., and they're still stomping, slamming doors, and hammering like they're trying to rebuild the place from the inside out. It's ridiculous. Remember how I mentioned I'd sit in my tent, minding my own business? Well, these new neighbors apparently decided that was the most interesting thing in the world. I started noticing them coming out of their house, hands on hips, just glaring at my tent. At first, I thought maybe they were just curious. New neighbors, weird tent next door, I get it. But this was different. They'd go out of their way to position themselves so they could peer through the tiniest gaps in the tent walls. It was like they were on some kind of stakeout trying to catch me doing, I don't know what. I'd be sitting there working on my novel or just relaxing, and I'd look up to see these narrowed eyes and grimacing faces staring at me through a sliver in the tent. It was creepy as hell. So after months of my tent being a non-issue, guess what happens? Yep, you guessed it. The property manager texts us out of the blue saying the HOA is demanding we take down the tent immediately or face a $250 fine. I was floored. I mean, we'd had permission, right? We'd done everything by the book. So I called the manager, reminding him that he'd given us the okay. And you know what this guy does? He flat out denies ever giving us permission. Just like that, he throws us under the bus. Now here's the kicker. It's been raining cats and dogs for days, and the forecast says it's not letting up anytime soon. So I asked if we could wait for the weather to clear up. I explained that we needed to dry out the tent before storing it or it would get moldy. You'd think that was a reasonable request, right? Nope. The answer was a hard no. The tent had to come down now. No exceptions, no delays. So there we were, in the middle of a downpour, taking down this tent that meant so much to me. It wasn't just a tent, you know. It was my sanctuary, my mental health tool, my little piece of peace in this crazy world. And as we're struggling with this sopping wet tent, guess who decides to come out for a little stroll? Yep, our lovely new neighbors. They're just casually walking around watching us like it's the most entertaining show they've seen in years. I was so angry I could feel my blood boiling, but what could I do? Scream at them? Throw the wet tent at their smug faces? As much as I wanted to, I knew I had to be the adult here. So I just gritted my teeth and kept working. In the end, my beloved tent, this $300 investment in my mental health, ended up in the trash. There was no way to dry it out in time to prevent mold. It was heartbreaking, honestly. After all this went down, I decided to do some digging. Remember how the property manager said the HOA manual wasn't available? Well, guess what I found with a quick Google search? Yep, the entire thing available online for anyone to read. So I did what any angry, wronged person would do. I read through that entire manual. Twice. And you know what I found? Absolutely nothing about tents being prohibited. Not a single word. No vague allusions, no unclear rules that could be interpreted that way. Nothing. This got me thinking. If it wasn't in the rules, why was I forced to take down my tent? And why now, after months of it being up with no issues, feeling frustrated and a bit vindictive, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. And boy, did that open my eyes. You want to talk about HOA violations? I saw houses that looked like they were auditioning for an episode of HOAs. There were yards cluttered with garbage, bikes rusting away in driveways, sports equipment that looked like it had been through a war. It was a far cry from the neat and tidy neighborhood I thought I was moving into. And that's when it really hit me. This HOA wasn't like the one I remembered from my childhood. That one was strict, sure, but at least it was consistent. Everyone had to follow the same rules. But this was selective enforcement at its finest. So here's my theory, and I'm pretty convinced I'm right. I think our new neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Haughty and their precious son, made a stink about my tent. They probably complained to the HOA, made up some story about how it was an eyesore or how the incense was bothering them. And the HOA, instead of actually checking their own rules or treating everyone fairly, just decided to come down on us. Why? Maybe because we're renters and not owners. Maybe because we don't have a fancy car or come from money. Who knows? So now here I am. My tent is gone, my outdoor sanctuary destroyed. I'm back to feeling cooped up, struggling to find a place where I can relax and write without feeling like I'm being watched. Every time I see our new neighbors, I have to resist the urge to say something. It's hard, you know. Knowing that they probably had a hand in this. That their complaints, if that's what happened, led to me losing something that was really important to me. But I'm trying to be the bigger person. I'm not going to stoop to their level of pettiness, even if I really, really want to. The silver lining in all of this, we're only here for another year. We're counting down the days until we can get out of this place and back into our own home. And you can bet your bottom dollar that when we buy our next place, it won't be anywhere near an HOA. I've learned my lesson. No matter how good an HOA might seem on the surface, you never know what kind of power-tripping nonsense you might be getting into. It's just not worth the hassle. So that's my story. It might not be the worst HOA tale out there, but it's mine, and it's got me pretty worked up. If there's a lesson to be learned here, I guess it's this. Always read the fine print, don't trust property managers who won't give you the rules, and for the love of all that's holy, think twice before moving into an HOA community. Oh, and if you ever find yourself in a situation like mine, document everything. Get permissions in writing. And maybe, just maybe, invest in a really good pair of noise-canceling headphones. You never know when you might end up living next to the family from hell. Here's hoping the next year flies by and we can put this whole tent debacle behind us. Until then, I'll be here, dreaming of the day when I can sit outside without feeling like I'm being watched by the neighborhood watch from hell. You asked for a copy of the community rules and were told they couldn't give them to you. And you signed a lease anyway, and then discovered that those docs are available online, and then took a walk around the neighborhood to discover that the rules are not fairly applied fairly to everyone. You bought a $300 tent on the manager's word that it was okay to put up the tent, and then took it down on that same person's word that it was not okay anymore. Never getting anything in writing. You just know it's because of your new neighbor. Have you tried speaking to them? Yeah, this HOA doesn't seem to be well run. But you also failed yourself by not completing your due diligence before signing a lease. Did you try looking up the association online before moving on? Did you drive around the neighborhood to check it out before moving it? You need to shoulder some of the responsibility here. Do your own research and get everything in writing. Wow, that sounds incredibly frustrating. It's so unfair that you had to take down your tent, especially when it was such an important part of your mental health routine. It's really disheartening to hear that the HOA isn't consistent with their rules, and that they seem to be targeting you unfairly. I can't believe the manager denied giving you permission after you went through all the trouble and expense. And those new neighbors sound like a nightmare. It's a shame that some people can be so inconsiderate and entitled. I hope the housing market improves soon so you can find a new place without an HOA hanging there. I can totally understand your anger and frustration. It sounds like you did everything right by asking for permission and trying to follow the rules, only to be let down by the HOA and the manager. It's really unfair that they made you take down the tent immediately, especially in such bad weather. And it's even worse that other people in the community aren't held to the same standards. Your new neighbors sound really rude and inconsiderate, and it's awful that they might be the reason you had to get rid of your tent. I hope things get better for you soon, and that you can find a new home without these kinds of issues.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.